Well, good morning everyone once again, and good morning those who are watching us online. We welcome you all to this wonderful congregation, and I'm so happy to see so many of you. I think Graham will have to do some extensions next week to accommodate more people because we're filling up quite quickly. Well, today I want to approach this presentation with a grateful heart. We've entitled it, "The Heart of a Child." Can you imagine yourself, a child? You travel to Europe, to a remote country, to stay for a while with your grandparents, and then COVID-19 strikes. And then your parents want you to come back, but you realize you can't. There are no flights and no airlines which could fly you by yourself. Well, that's what exactly happened to a family who used to be members of Pakenham Church until last year. You remember Emma, Emma Gigao. She used to come here before she got married to Alistair. You remember Alistair, who joined us last year by profession of faith. He was a Pentecostal, and then he decided to become a Seventh-day Adventist. And he joined us, and then we had a wedding right at the end of last year. You remember, in December? They both received a job in another suburb of Melbourne, and therefore they relocated their membership to Wanturna Church. But we still love them, and I told them, you look, once a Pakenham member, forever a Pakenham member, okay? You're here forever. So you remember that she used to come with little Josh Gigao. Josh, a 12-year-old kid. Did you know that it took Emma almost 10 months to have Josh come back to Australia from Romania? He arrived a week and a half ago, and now Emma is in hotel quarantine with Josh in Melbourne airport. She told me that she had to call the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade more than 40 times. Countless times the airlines trying to find a place and provision and documentation for her son to come back. She said it was a continuous battle and struggle. She said, sometimes I just grew so desperate because in Romania all schools were closed. It was almost impossible for him to even study online. And there he was in the loving care of his grandparents, and poor mum's heart was being torn apart by the fact that she could not see her child for so many months. But now little Josh is back, and mum and son are reunited. And I asked her, how do you find hotel quarantine? I had a couple of chats with her in the past week. She said, I really don't care. My son is back, and that's it. Okay, so she said, I really don't care about the quarantine. The conditions, the food. She said, I know that if I go in the lobby, they will give me on the spot fine of $3,000. The only time she can open the door is to get food inside, and then she has to shut the door back. There are many children in the world who need love and care, and there are many adults in the world who need to learn from children. Would you please open your Bibles in Matthew chapter 18? We're going to spend a few moments reading the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew 18, verses 1 to 5. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Then Jesus called a little child to him, set him in the midst of them, and said, "Assuredly I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me." You see, the Gospels are the real accounts of the life of Jesus. And besides the miracles and the Passion Week, the cross and the resurrection, You see in the Gospels the reality of human relationships. You see Jesus often opposed by the religious leaders of Israel. You see the group of his disciples, they're real people with real dreams, passions, aspirations, love and hatred, with different dreams. You see that the Gospels are the real life accounts. And if you look at the disciples and the personality of those disciples, you may understand a lot of their sayings, words, phrases, questions in the Gospels in the light of what was happening in that old age. Can you imagine living in a country which is continuously oppressed? You are free only provisionally. In reality, you are enslaved. The Roman Empire was the most powerful empire in the ancient world. Not as sizey and not as populous as China and as ancient China, but definitely the one that is still influencing us today. The great Rome. First the Republic, then a dictatorship. First the consuls, then the emperors and dictators. Mighty Iron Rome. And that little land. By the way, yesterday I received a little message from one church member asking me a question. The lady said, why is it that Israel as a country chosen by God was such a little, feeble, fragile country? Look at Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, ancient Egypt. They were all mighty lands. And Israel was hardly visible even on the map. Why is it that God's children were so weak and so vulnerable? Why wouldn't God choose a nation stronger and mightier than ancient Israel? And the disciples now were living in an age when Israel had a long history of the absence of country's independence. Any citizen of the country could be enslaved at any moment in time. As I mentioned before, their freedom was only provisional. And I think that type of mindset of an oppressed nation would breed the complex of national inferiority and the desire one day to be free. No wonder why the Israelites in the days of Christ connected the coming of the Messiah, the arrival of the Messianic kingdom, with political freedom and liberty. Moreover, they pictured a Messiah, they painted him in a form of a mighty general, a Moses with a staff that could strike the waters and separate the sea. The Israelites were dreaming not only about personal liberation, but about the global conquest. What a strange idea in the minds of such a small nation. Almost everybody in that country was dreaming, yes, when the Messianic kingdom comes, we're the ones who will govern and rule the world. Different pseudo-messiahs came and left. Some were killed. Some were destroyed, jailed, enslaved. Jesus was not the only one in that day and age who was proclaimed the Messiah. But he was strikingly different from the rest. All the others raised the sword. Jesus would go around without any arms. He would take kids on his hands and tell everybody, look, if you want to know what my kingdom is, look at these children. That's what my kingdom is all about. And then, but yet he was doing things that no other Messiah could replicate. He was a real, fair dinkum, true blue miracle maker. He would touch the eyes of people born blind, and they would see with the best vision that they could be tomorrow employed as airline pilots. He could touch the ears of the deaf people, and you could employ them in surveillance tomorrow. They could listen even the minute tones of human voices. He would let the mute people speak, and they could sing like Pavarotti on the next day. He would yell out, "Lazarus, come forth!" And the decomposing body would be composed again, and Lazarus would come out. He would calm the waters of the raging lake. He would comfort. He would heal. Clean leprosy. And you will notice that most of the miracles in the life of Christ would be connected to the proclamation of forgiveness. You remember, every time Jesus healed people, he also proclaimed that they're healed, cleansed, and forgiven. And the disciples saw it over and over and over again. They saw Jesus feeding the 5,000 and the 4,000 on another occasion. Just think about it, having a luncheon of this magnitude with only 5 loaves of bread and only 2 fish. I don't know of any catering specialist in the world that could reproduce what Jesus did. The disciples were finally coming to a conclusion. This must be one. This must be one. This is the Messiah. And amongst themselves, they were already separating the future ministerial portfolios in the new kingdom. They knew, well, if this man can make such miracles which only God can do, because raising the dead can only be done by a God. No human can do this. If he's not God, but at least the divine power is in him manifested as if he were God. Not every disciple believed in the divinity of Christ. And they thought in their minds, well, this will be the great time when he will finally announce the kingdom of the Messiah. He is the coming of the Messiah to the world, and we will sit. And in fact, they had fiery, sharp discussions about who will sit on his right hand and who will sit on his left hand. You remember one very jealous mum, the mother of James and John, you remember? She came to Jesus and she said, well, Jesus, if it is possible when you come and you are enthroned, can you please take these young ones and give them a good place in your government? It's quite normal in the Oriental cultures that when someone comes to power, he will bring into his cabinet as many relatives and friends as possible. It's normal for the Middle East. It's in the mind of the people of the countries of the Fertile Crescent. And they were dividing those positions amongst themselves, often fiercely fighting each other. And they would even approach Jesus and ask him subtly, without the open question, Jesus, can you please appoint me the prime minister? They would ask him a question, who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And you will notice reading the Gospels that the Gospels as books are very paradoxical. They're full of controversy, and they are full of those pluses and minuses, contrasting pictures and contrasting answers. Jesus is full of surprises. In fact, almost every answer he would give in the Gospels would be very countercultural, counter-political, counter-social in his time. In this context, you will discover that Jesus potentially was the greatest spiritual revolutionary of his time. And you will see, then Jesus called a little child to him, set him in the middle of them and said, just can you imagine, he said in the middle of them, they were either sitting down or reclining, and here comes a little child. And Jesus says, assuredly I say to you, assuredly means that's the absolute truth. This phrase, assuredly, which you find everywhere in the Gospels, is very emphatic. Jesus is putting special stress and accent on this phrase. Surely I say to you, unless you are converted and become as who? As little children. So look at the phrase converted. The phrase converted means to turn around. You were going in one direction, and then you could turn 180 degrees, and you're going in the opposite direction. That's conversion. The biblical conversion is you go in one direction, turn around, and you go in the opposite direction. You are going towards being the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. You must be converted, turn around, and become like a little child. That's biblical conversion. Biblical conversion is when God takes a proud heart, striving for the tops of the mountains, and Jesus turns that person around and sends him to preschool or spiritual learning and says, become like this little child. Surely I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. And that was a shocking statement for the disciples. They were with Jesus for several years, breakfasting with him, having lunch, dining with him, walking with him dozens of miles in the heat, sleeping in the cold, often without a roof of their head, their only blanket, heavenly stars. They were sharing in all his ups and downs. They've seen his miracles. They've seen everything. And Jesus says, the fact that you've walked with me for so long does not automatically give you an admission ticket to the kingdom of heaven. For you to get there, you must become like this little child. If this experience doesn't happen in your life, Jesus warns, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is who? Is the greatest. Whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven's greatness is different to human greatness. In this world around us, people are striving for wealth. A few days ago, a YouTube documentary appeared about the Russian politician Alexei Navalny, where he's showing the palace of Vladimir Putin, which potentially is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, the most expensive piece of real estate in the world. And did you know that that documentary alone accumulated now more than 60 million watches? Okay, so it's one of the most popular documentaries in the world. It's called The Palace of Putin. People in the world look to buy a yacht. And there are some yachts by some people in the world which can't be docked in every port in the world because they're so huge. We know that some people are striving for wealth. And some people are checking the Forbes statistics. Who is higher in the world? Who is wealthier? Joseph Bezos with Amazon or Elon Musk with SpaceX and Tesla? People think that greatness is wealth. Other people are looking for Grammys, Oscars, Nobel Prizes. Some people are getting very upset hearing that there is a possibility of the cancellation of the Olympic Games in Tokyo and even in Beijing next year because of the COVID pandemic, because they've been preparing for so long to one day stand on that pedestal for a few moments, for the whole world to see their greatness of how they develop their body strength. In this world, people are striving for all these tops in the world, and they're great in human eyes. And in fact, it's not a bad thing that people strive for something better. A good old proverb says, better is the soldier who doesn't want to become a general. It's normal for us to grow and advance in our careers, developments. It's normal for us, for humans to grow. Growth is good. Achievements are great. It's how you treat that growth and how you interpret those achievements. That's what really matters. The greatness of the kingdom of heaven his humility, his meekness. Jesus, you remember, he said, blessed are the meek. That's the enunciation of his heavenly constitution in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And for the disciples, that message was as sharp as a sharp sword, because they were the ones who had the biggest political ambitions of the time. And they were thinking, could this be true? Can you imagine the great disappointment when Calvary happened? When just a few days before, on Sunday, they saw the triumphant entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, though that entry in their minds was a little bit confusing, because he rode into Jerusalem not on a white horse, but on a little humble donkey. And they were thinking, what does it all mean? On one hand, the crowd putting palm branches at his feet. And I don't know if what would happen if that donkey on which Jesus rode would think that it was all for him. But anyway, that's for the preachers. If you preach the gospel, remember, you're only a donkey on whom Jesus is riding. And if people tell you that you're a good preacher, remember, all the praises go to Jesus, not to the donkey. So my friends, for the disciples, these words were shocking, because they had hot political aspirations. Jesus says, calm. And then the cross happened, the Calvary. And they saw that the person whom they wanted to be on the top of the world happened to be the most humiliated person, crucified naked on the cross, in the most humiliating manner of that time. The crucifixion for the Romans was not only torture, and the torture it was also a moment of ultimate shame. No wonder why one author said that the angels turned their faces, they could not even look at the cross, because it was also a very shameful experience. I remember once when I was almost put to shame in front of the entire church in Siberia 21 years ago. It was in winter, and there was I standing at the pulpit in front of the church, and I had trousers, and my trousers were not supported by a belt, but a pair of suspenders. You know those suspenders which men have? And there was I standing in front of the church, and then I realized that my suspenders jumped inside. Something happened, and the clippers got unclipped inside, and I felt the suspenders went up. And there I am, showing myself to the church, and I can't just lift open my suit and pull down the suspenders, and then I realized that my trousers are gradually descending. And I put my hips together as tight as I could, so that I could, and then I started doing like this. Helen later asked me, because she saw it all happening in that church, she asked me, Vadim, why were you always pulling your pants up? And you see, I was greedy to buy a belt, so I used the suspenders on me. Anyway, so I barely made it till the end of the sermon. Because can you imagine what would happen to me if suddenly my pants decided to make me look very humble? If that happened to me during a sermon, the church would laugh probably, and people would definitely remember that occasion for years. But the cross was no laughter experience. It was a very humble, humiliating experience. And the moment of disappointment. It was only the resurrection on the third day which gave them a complete turnaround in their thinking, hope, and belief that he will return and he will come back in glory one day. The resurrection was a foretaste of the glorious return of Christ at the end of time. But here they were, looking at Jesus, who said, whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me. And then Jesus said, whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me. Why is it that God gave us children? And it doesn't mean that you have to have a child. Maybe you don't have a son or a daughter. This principle is still applicable to all of us. Why is it that we have children in our community, in our society, in our families, or amongst our relatives? The kids are given to us so that we could learn the love of God to human beings. Whether you have a child or not doesn't really matter. The children around us are there for us to learn the love of God. Because often children may irritate us and could make us so nervous, depressed, upset, brought down like no other beings in the world. Is it true or not? And they may be, and the worst part is if a child does something that is so upsetting that you can barely see that child again. And I believe that in a certain sense, the way children behave often reminds us about ourselves, of how we are there, a human community on this earth, and God is watching us. I think there are moments in time when even the creator of the universe could just say, I am done with these people. I am done. That's enough. But he does the opposite. He goes down to this world. And on the cross he died. Because he is the ultimate portrayal of love. On love, the whole universe hangs, moves, exists, evolves and revolves. Everything around us in this universe, you and I, everything in the world is based on the fact that God is patient and is loving, and he loves you and he loves me. And he wants to plant that love deep in our heads, in our hearts, and in our minds. He wants us all to have the heart of a child. Jesus said, if you are like this little kid, then you will definitely make it to heaven. Because that little child is sincere. That little child is genuine. That little child is open. That little child believes and trusts. And it is with this belief and trust that you and I are saved by grace of God. May the Lord give you and me today the heart of a child and the great love of God to us all. Would you like to be like Jesus? Would you bow your heads and let us pray? Father in heaven, I want to thank you for loving us and giving us the words of the gospel, which we ask you to bring fruit in our lives. Give us a genuine, trusting heart of a child when it comes to you. When we look at children around us, give us genuine love to them, regardless of the fact whether they come from our families or somebody else's. We're also praying that you'll make our church the most loving, caring, wonderful, attractive, safe place for all. In the name of Jesus Christ.